Welcome back to the channel. There is a specific kind of fear that only hits you when you are completely alone. It's that moment when the silence of your empty house suddenly feels heavy. When you realize that the only thing separating you from the darkness outside is a thin sheet of glass or a fragile wooden door. Tonight, we are diving into three terrifying, true stories centered around isolation. From a snow-covered home with a broken lock to a forgotten apartment building on Halloween night, and finally, the echoing silence of a lonely warehouse shift. So, turn off the lights, check your locks one last time, put on your headphones, and let's get started. It was last winter, and I was living in a situation that, looking back, was a recipe for disaster. I was living completely alone in a small, single-story home in a quiet neighborhood. But it wasn't just quiet, it was isolated. The property was one of those places where the backyard didn't have a fence. It just dissolved into a dense line of trees and miles of undeveloped, frozen land. I had been there for about a year with zero issues. I loved the solitude. But there was one detail about the house that I ignored. A detail that almost cost me my life. The lock on my bedroom door had been broken for about 3 months. It was a cheap push-button handle that just stopped clicking into place one day. I remember noticing it, shrugging and thinking, I live alone. If the front doors are locked, why do I need to lock my bedroom? It seemed like an unnecessary hassle to fix it. I was young, broke, and lazy. The incident happened over a long weekend. The weather was brutal, snowing on and off with temperatures dropping way below zero. It was the kind of cold that hurts your face if you step outside. So naturally, I stayed inside all day, cleaning, watching TV, and enjoying the warmth. Around 11:45 p.m., I turned off all the lights and then went to bed. The house was pitch black. Sometime later, I don't know when exactly, my eyes snapped open. You know that feeling when you wake up suddenly, not groggy, but fully alert? My heart was hammering against my ribs. The silence in the house was heavy. I lay there, trying to figure out what woke me up. That's when I saw it, my bedroom door. I had closed it before bed. I always did. But now it was cracked open about 3 inches. A slice of darker blackness from the hallway was cutting into the room. My internal alarm started ringing, but my logical brain tried to fight it. It's an old house, I told myself. The wind is howling outside. Maybe the pressure change popped it open. I forced myself out of the warm covers, shivering instantly. I didn't turn on the light. I just walked to the door, pushed it shut until I heard the latch click, or thought I did, and went back to bed. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake a sick feeling in my gut. I felt exposed. I spent the next 30 minutes just staring into the corners of the room, watching shadows that weren't there. Then I heard a sound. It was faint, a shuffle, like fabric brushing against a wall or a sock sliding on a floorboard. It came from the hallway, right outside my room. I stopped breathing. I sat up, rigid, straining my ears. The silence stretched on for so long that I started to doubt myself again. Eventually, exhaustion won. I drifted back into a restless sleep. I don't know how much time passed before I woke up a second time. And just like before, my heart was racing. The air in the room felt different, charged, like static electricity. I slowly turned my head toward the door. My blood ran cold. The door was cracked open again. I lay there, paralyzed. There was no way the wind did that twice. I knew I had closed it. I stared at that vertical gap of darkness, terrified of what might be looking back at me. I tried to convince myself to get up and close it one more time. I shifted my legs to the side of the bed, and then I saw movement. In the gap between the door and the frame, a shadow shifted. It wasn't the house settling, it was distinct. Someone was standing in the hallway, inches away from the door, shifting their weight. My mind went blank with terror. I didn't scream, I didn't think, I just reacted. I launched myself off the bed, flew across the room, and slammed my body weight against the door. I heard the wood creak as I pressed myself into it, locking my knees, terrified that someone on the other side would push back. But they didn't push. For 15 agonizing seconds, there was silence. Then, from the other side of the wood, I heard it. Heavy, dull footsteps. They didn't run. They just slowly walked away from my door, down the hallway, and down the stairs. I heard the back door open and close. I called the police immediately, my hands shaking so hard I could barely dial. They searched the house but found nothing inside. However, as we were standing in the kitchen, explaining to the officer that I heard the intruder leave through the back door, I looked out the kitchen window toward the tree line. My heart stopped. Standing in the trees, barely visible against the snow, was a silhouette, a man. He was just standing there, completely still, watching us through the window. Before I could shout to the officers, he turned and melted into the woods. That night changed me, but the scariest part came a few weeks later when the snow started to melt. I went into the backyard to investigate. I found trails in the mud, footpaths that had been worn down over time. They led from the woods directly to my back windows, and upon closer inspection, I found the latch on one of the back windows was broken, just like my bedroom door. This wasn't a one-time break-in. This stranger had been stalking me, entering my home and walking around while I slept, for who knows how long. That night just happened to be the night I woke up. I'm writing this as a warning. I know it's winter now, but this happened a few months ago, on Halloween night. It was the catalyst that finally made me leave the city. I was living in an ancient apartment building on the outskirts of town. It was the kind of place people end up in when they have no other options. Cheap, drafty, and smelling of old dust. The building was 3 stories high, but over the last year, all and other tenants had moved out. The landlord never rented the units out again. So, by October, I was pretty sure I was the only person living in this massive, rotting building. It was eerie. When I walked through the halls, the only sound was my own footsteps echoing on the tile. It felt like living in a ghost town. On Halloween night, I wasn't celebrating. I had just gotten back from work, tired and worn out. I threw my keys on the table, sat on the couch, and planned to watch some YouTube videos. It was dead silent, as usual. Then, at 9:00 p.m., 3 loud, deliberate knocks hammered on my door. Bang, bang, bang. I nearly jumped out of my skin. I hadn't heard anyone walk up the stairs. I hadn't heard the main building door open. Confused and a bit on edge, I walked over and looked through the peephole. I didn't see anyone. I unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open. Standing there was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8 years old. She was wearing a cheap Halloween costume and a plastic mask. She held out a bright orange trick-or-treat bag. I stared at her, completely frozen. My brain couldn't process it. A child, alone, in this abandoned building? Where are your parents? I asked, my voice trembling a little. How did you get in here? The girl didn't speak. She didn't say trick or treat. She just stood there, staring at me through the eye holes of that plastic mask. Her bag was empty. I looked past her into the hallway. It was dark and empty. Silence. I don't have any candy, I said, feeling a mix of guilt and suspicion. Without a word, the girl lowered her bag, turned around, and walked away. She walked toward the staircase and disappeared down the steps. She didn't knock on any other doors. She had come specifically for me. I closed the door and locked it. Something felt wrong. My instinct was screaming at me. I went to the window and looked down at the parking lot. My car was the only one there, no parents waiting outside. I needed to know what was going on. I grabbed my jacket and stepped out into the hallway. I walked down the stairs, listening intently. Silence. When I got to the ground floor, I checked the front door. The girl was gone. But then, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Next to the front door was an electronic keypad for entry. It had been broken and disconnected for the entire year I lived there, but tonight, the little red light was blinking. Someone had powered it up. Someone had punched in a code. I turned around and ran back upstairs. I didn't want to be out in the open anymore. As I reached my floor, the 3rd floor, I froze. The door to the apartment across the hall from mine was wide open. I had just walked past it 2 minutes ago. It was closed then. Hello, I called out. My voice echoed, but no one answered. Panic set in. I sprinted the last few feet to my apartment, slammed the door, and locked all three locks. I backed away from the door, my breathing shallow. Not 10 seconds later, a fist pounded on my door. Boom, boom, boom. It was heavy, aggressive, not the knock of a child. I crept to the peephole. Standing there was a man dressed entirely in black, with a hood pulled low over his face. He was pressing his ear against the door, listening. Then I heard it. Whispers from the hallway. Is he in there? Check the back. There was more than one of them. My phone was already in my hand. I dialed 911 and whispered my address. I knew they were going to come in. The wood frame of my door was old and rotting. It wouldn't hold against a kick. I ran to the balcony doors. My apartment was small, and there was nowhere to hide. I slid out onto the tiny balcony and crouched down behind some old storage boxes, pulling the blinds shut so they couldn't see me from the inside. A moment later, I heard a loud crack, and my front door flew open. Heavy boots stomped onto my floorboards. Flashlights swept across the room. I could see the beams cutting through the blinds. Check the bedroom, a deep voice growled. I huddled in the freezing cold, praying they wouldn't check the balcony. They tore my apartment apart for about 5 minutes. I heard glass breaking, drawers being dumped out. Then, sirens wailed in the distance. Cops! Let's go! I heard them scramble out. I waited until the police were banging on my door before I came back inside. The police confirmed what I suspected. I was the only legal resident in the building. The investigation theory was chilling. They believed the men used the little girl as a soft bait. They sent her to knock so I would open the door willingly, lowering my guard because it was just a child. When that didn't work, they came up to take what they wanted by force. I moved out the next morning. I never found out who the girl was or what those men planned to do to me if I had opened the door for her. I've worked a lot of bad jobs, but the one that still gives me nightmares was the night shift at a shipping warehouse just outside of town. It was a massive, cavernous building made of concrete and steel. During the busy season, the place was loud and full of people. But in the winter, during the slow season, the company cut hours. For 3 weeks, I was assigned the skeleton shift. From midnight to 6 o'clock a.m., I was the only employee in a building the size of 2 football fields. I tried to enjoy the solitude. I put my earbuds in, listened to podcasts, and scanned packages. But the silence of a warehouse is different. It's heavy. The air is stagnant. Every tiny noise, a settling pipe, a shifting pallet, echoes like a gunshot. This particular night, around 2 o'clock a.m., I was in the back corner of the warehouse, scanning inventory. I had my music playing low. Suddenly, I felt a vibration through the floor. Not a machine, but a rhythmic thud. I paused my music. Silence. Then, scuff. It was the unmistakable sound of a rubber sole dragging on concrete. It was quiet, but it was there. Hello? I called out. Boss, is that you? My voice echoed into the darkness of the aisles. No answer. I shook my head. You're just tired, I told myself. It's just the building. I walked toward the front office to log my work. The office was a glass-walled box that overlooked the warehouse floor, elevated about 10 feet up. I sat down at the computer, but I couldn't focus. I had this prickling sensation on the back of my neck. I spun my chair around and looked out the window over the dark rows of shelving. Movement. Down in aisle 4, a shadow detached itself from the darkness and moved behind a stack of pallets. It wasn't a rat. It was tall. It was a person. My adrenaline spiked. I stood up, knocking my chair over. I grabbed a heavy metal wrench from the tool drawer, the only weapon I could find. I stepped out of the office onto the metal walkway. Hey, you can't be in here. I'm calling the police, I shouted, trying to sound tougher than I felt. No response. I went down the stairs, my grip on the wrench tightening until my knuckles turned white. I needed to clear the building. I walked down the main corridor, checking the aisles one by one. Empty, empty, empty. I reached the far back wall. There was a service corridor there that led to the maintenance rooms. It was a dead end. If someone was back here, they were trapped. I stood at the entrance of the dark corridor. Come out now. A door at the very end of the hall creaked open slowly. A man stepped out. He looked wrong. He was young, maybe early 20s, but his clothes were torn and filthy. His hair was matted, but it was his eyes that terrified me. They were wide, unblinking, and focused entirely on me. He didn't look scared that he was caught. He looked excited. Get out, I warned, raising the wrench. He didn't speak. He tilted his head, smiling a jagged, crazy smile. He started walking toward me, not running, just a steady, predatory walk. Stay back, I yelled. He kept coming. When he was about 20 feet away, I saw his hand move behind his back. He whipped his arm forward with terrifying speed. I ducked instinctively. Clang! A massive hammer smashed into the metal doorframe right where my head had been a split second ago. The sound was deafening, ringing in my ears like a bell. The man let out a guttural scream and charged at me. I didn't try to fight. I turned and ran. I sprinted back toward the front office, my boots slamming against the concrete. I could hear him behind me, panting, his footsteps chaotic and fast. I reached the stairs to the office, took them two at a time, and threw myself inside. I slammed the heavy steel door and locked the deadbolt just as a body collided with it from the other side. Thud, thud, thud. He was throwing himself against the door. I scrambled back, grabbing the phone to dial 911. Through the safety glass of the office window, I saw him. He was pressing his face against the glass, smearing it with sweat and dirt, screaming silent obscenities at me. He started punching the glass over and over until his hands were bloody. Realizing he couldn't get in, he suddenly stopped. He stared at me for one last second, his chest heaving, and then turned and walked away. He strolled out the back exit like nothing had happened. The police arrived 10 minutes later, but he was gone. We checked the security footage. It showed him breaking in through a side door almost 3 hours before I saw him. He had been following me, hiding behind shelves, watching me work for hours, just waiting for the right moment. I quit the next day. I still can't be in large, empty rooms without looking over my shoulder. And that brings us to the end of tonight's video. If you made it this far, I want to know, which story unsettled you the most? Was it the silent watcher in the snow, the trap set by the little girl, or the maniac in the warehouse? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed these stories and want to support the channel, please leave a like and hit that subscribe button. It really helps more than you know. I have many more stories to tell, so turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Until then, stay safe, keep your doors locked, and I will see you in the next video.